In this video, we're gonna go through a game between Firouzja, white, and Magnus Carlsen, black. This was a rapid game played online in the Champions Chess Tour, Goldmoney Asian Rapid, that Magnus won eventually. But very interestingly, Firouzja won that game. And since the two players don't meet that often on the board, I like to go over that critical game that Magnus lost with black. Now I'll go a little bit for the opening here, e4, e5. Alireza Firouzja didn't go into bishop b5, the Spanish, or lines in the Italian. Instead, he sidestepped theory. He wanted a real game with the Vienna. Of course, Magnus knows this opening as well and played with white a few times. And here they reached the f4. That's a fairly unknown move. And then they continue with a6. And this position has been played, but it's not very common. So for instance, f5 is a move here. Knight g5 is also a possibility. And I would say an interesting try is take, bishop g5, and queen d6. But none of that happened, and here Alireza just went bishop b3. And after h6, queen e2, it is very likely that the players were no longer into their opening prep, so they played the game. Now, let's go to a key moment in the game on move 29, and we're in the ending. So typically, Magnus is feared as one of the best endgame players in low technical positions, and usually can even transform equal endgames into a win. But here, black is already better. Why is that? You get 2 pawns here, they're ready, they pass pawns, they can advance. Yes, white has a pawn here, but it doesn't seem that that pawn can really go forward that much. So this is white to play. Alireza Firouzja is white, and here if you were to trade, that would be a mistake. You can see this is gonna take a long time for white to advance, but black can really push and threaten to promote first. So of course here in this position, white is kind of in trouble and tried knight a4. That's an interesting move, and one of the ideas, like black tried to take too early, then you can jump in with a knight like that, and then you can just jump in like that. So obviously Magnus saw that and said, I'm not gonna do anything there, and play rook e2, threatening e4. Fine, so they play a few moves, check, the king goes there, and because a4 is threatened, rook c4 defends the pawn. Fine, now h5. So black is advancing, and Alireza play rook g1. So let's stop right there. Once again, there's the possibility for white to advance. Black is securing the position, but black has a very simple plan, right? h4, h3, h2, and g5. So this is a critical position, and rook g1 targets g7. So here, Magnus play g6. Let's try to understand his logic. Well, you could simply push like that. Then white would take, you keep pushing, white goes there, and then h2. So white has taken the pawn here and has an active rook. So Magnus didn't like to go into that. However, here, this is clearly winning for black. To give you a line, if you go rook c1, which is the best move, rook g2, threatening rook g1. If instead you play b4, then of course you're gonna do check, the rook has to come back, take, check, and obviously you are winning with black, because if the king moves, you go like that, then you're gonna promote and win the knight. So we can see that even though h4 was very, very good and the most principled, Magnus says, well, wait a minute, I don't want Alireza to get activity. I'm gonna play g6, and now I'm protecting, of course, with a knight. And now I'm gonna push. And what can white do? So that was the logic. So Alireza here play a4. And that's the start of how Magnus Carlsen World Champion is gonna get tricked. So now here, black has a lot of possible moves. So I wouldn't say that white has equalized here. Let me give you an example. 93 is a good move because it threatens taking on b2. Another move is to stop a4, a5, and you play a5 yourself. That would be a possibility. But I think the best move here would be take, take, knight d3, threaten that pawn, which is very hard to defend. So then white would take on g6, check, and now rook b4. But we can see that we keep exchanging pawns. So I think that Magnus was greedy and said, well, I don't want to exchange pawns. Let me push. And I'm going to the plan h4, h3, h2, and white cannot take on g6. So now this is where it gets very interesting. So we see the plan for black. What did Alireza find here to create counter chances? The answer is b4. No, he's pushing here, but let's take a look. h3 is natural. So then let's go b5. Take, take. All of a sudden, white is threatening b6, winning the rook. If you play b6 with black, checkmate, because that knight covers here. So we can see the danger. What if black takes over here? You can either do b6 and win the rook, or you can even take like that, and then you're threatening b6 and you are winning. Even rook h2, you can just actually play b6 or rook a4, and actually here you have checkmate. So you cannot do that either. So on b4, h3 doesn't work. So Magnus played b6 to avoid the tricks from Firouzja. And now what did white play here? Again, amazing counter play by white. The move b5. Now you may say again, but what if black simply does h3 followed by h2? And here the amazing tactical brilliance by Firouzja is the move a5. And if you take like that, check and win the rook. And that's pretty convincing. And if you take like that, b6, and white wins. So it turns out that on h3, a5 is winning for white. Isn't it amazing? These two pawns are stronger than the h3 pawn. Now, Magnus saw that, and he could have played, let's say, 93, but then you go like that, and then you still play a5 and you win. So he decided to block the counterplay and play a5 himself. So it looks like finally black has secured the position. White cannot advance. So what about now? Is black winning? And is Firouzja lost? Not so fast. Now, I want to show you that if you give up and play rook f1, then you go h3. If you wait, then g5, and then g4, g3 will be completely winning. But of course here, Firouzja doesn't give up and play knight takes e5. And the idea is like he cannot take because d6 is crushing for white. So knight e5 taken. h3 played, and here rook h1. Carlsen tried to trick as well by taking a pawn. Obviously, that knight is also under attack. Knight g6. And here in this crazy position there was only one good move, rook f7. But Carlsen said, let me just move my knight and attack the rook. And in this position, Carlsen is lost. Rook here. Now, knight g4, knight f4 hitting the rook moves, and knight d5. And now the knight attacks the rooks, and when the rooks moves, we're gonna have c7, and that c pawn is actually more a danger than that h3 pawn. So let's just see, in the game, knight f2 was played, hitting the rook. However, let's say, if rook c8 would be played, rook takes h3, followed by rook h7, attacking the king here. And that will be completely lost for black, because the rook will go to b7, knight b6 is lost, and white is completely winning here. So Carlsen saw that and tried to hit the rook. But now after take, rook h3, and now white is winning. Why is that? Well, the only move would be knight f2, and now rook h8, threaten, rook a8, checkmate. And black can give a couple of checks, but the king will run out of checks, and then you cannot avoid the checkmate. So in these positions, it's completely lost, and actually earlier on rook h3, Carlsen resigned. So I wanted just to showcase that amazing play in this position where black is better, turn out into this crazy position where a5 would win the game. And then in the game, we saw another great fight where rook h3, and that way Alireza ends up checkmating Carlsen. So I think that was an amazing turnaround and showing the skills and the level of Firouzja against the number one player. No wonder that the chess world is awaiting whether Alireza Firouzja will be able to qualify for the World Championship. I hope you enjoyed this recap. This game didn't receive the attention it needed, but shows the potential of Firouzja in the top of the chess world elite. Thank you very much.